I stand here tonight, facing west, on what was once the lost frontier. From the lands that stretch 3,000 miles behind us, the pioneers gave up their safety, their comfort, and sometimes their lives to build our new West. They were not the captives of their own doubts, nor the prisoners of their own price tags. They were determined to make the new world strong and free, an example to the world.
Finally, after years of waiting, we've arrived at the new frontier. No, but on a more serious note, I do apologize for this video taking so long. School has been a pain, and staying consistent has been a challenge, but hopefully things should be more steady from now on. But anyways, how about we talk about this comic? When you think of ensemble events of the DC Universe, what comes to your mind? Injustice, Kingdom Come, Crisis on Infinite Earths?
Soon.
Well, today, we'll be shedding light on this one, DC The New Frontier. Originally, New Frontier was a 2004 series set in the 1950s, focusing on the golden and silver ages of superheroes, touching on things like the Korean War, the space race, and the general aesthetic of that time period. The comic was genuinely one of the best storylines I've read in a while, and that's taking into account the stuff I've read recently for these videos, which has all been really good too. Anyways, a mere 4 years after the comic's initial release, an animated movie came out adapting it. A few people in the comments have warned me that the movie is just a basic action flick, but hopefully it's better than they said. So far, this is the biggest comic I've tried to compare. Dark Knight Returns was big, sure, but with my Watchmen video, I really could have done a better job, and I'm hoping I'll do better this time, so without further ado, let's get started. So immediately we have our first difference. In the book, there's an entire chapter in the beginning dedicated to a military group called the Losers rescuing Rick Flag from a remote island filled with dinosaurs. This scene is used to introduce Flag, hint at the importance of the island, and set the stage for the story. The movie just completely cuts this out, which I kind of understand. In the movie at least, Flag doesn't really get much screen time or development, but he's also kind of important to the plot at the same time. And to set up the islands, they repurpose a scene that happens later in the comic, and that's what they use as the prologue. Towards the end of the movie, they do a homage to one of the panels from the comic, and it kind of carries over the same energy, but with a completely different characters, so it's a little weird. After this, the comic has two other scenes, one of a young Hal Jordan setting up his future in the Air Force, and another explaining what's happening with superheroes in this time period. It's similar to The Incredibles in a way. Following World War II, the government is doing away with most capes, the Justice Society retired, Batman is a wanted criminal. Familiar. And only a few heroes are kept around as military assets. I'll give you 2 guesses as to who.
Polka Dot Man.
The comic does a really good job with this sequence, and the movie keeps most of it intact, and repurposes it as the opening credits. That's going to be a trend that I'll talk about later. The movie tells the same general story, but does so by repurposing scenes or straight up removing them. Moving on, our first actual movie scene after the credits, 2 American pilots, Hal Jordan and Ace, are in a dogfight against Koreans at the end of the Korean War. Hal goes down and gets into a fight with an enemy soldier who he's forced to kill. The movie covers Hal himself really well here, but in the comic there's added context and dialogue from Ace, and a boots-on-the-ground point of view from Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen leaving the battlefield. Following this, we see an observatory in Gotham City, and a scientist suffering from a heart attack in the arms of some alien creature. The old man says some insightful last words before dying, leaving the alien, who most of you should know as Martian Manhunter, to go try and find his own place in the city. Back in Korea, there's a conversation between Superman and Wonder Woman talking about ethics and the American dream. I'm going to take this time to talk about the costumes now. Like I said earlier, the story focuses on the Golden Silver Age transition, and as such, most characters are wearing their debut original costumes. I'm not really sure why, but I have such a soft spot for those old looks, and it's not like seeing them here is the selling point of the story, it's just an aesthetic decision that complements the narrative.
Perfection.
Moving on, we see Martian Manhunter, who I'll be calling John from now on, adapting to human life, learning about Earth through the TV, with a pretty cheeky Looney Tunes reference thrown in there. After that, John joins the police force, which is a pretty cool reference, and is about to break into a church where some cult meeting is taking place. I like this scene in the movie better. John uses his powers to sneak into the church, where in the comic he just kicks the door down. Anyways, John gets inside, and who else is there but...
Here comes the money, 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 money.
Batman fighting some cultists. I know I already talked about the outfits, but I like how they slightly changed Batman's original look here. The artist just tamed down the colors a little bit, and I think that works just fine. The heroes fight off the cultists before a fire breaks out, which reveals John's weakness, fire. This is basically his only weakness in the comics, and I think both versions of the story do a good job showing it. Batman attempts to rescue the captive child, but he's scared of him, and John shoos him away. One of the unconscious cultists wakes up and warns the duo about a cosmic being coming to Earth called the Center. The next scene takes place in Las Vegas, where news reporter Iris West makes a phone call to her husband Barry Allen.
It was me, Barry.
In the comic, before John entered the church, there was a quick news broadcast and scene of Barry getting struck by lightning and becoming the Flash. I appreciated seeing it in the book, but the movie completely cut it out, which, again, I kind of understand, but I'll talk about later. Captain Cold breaks into whatever casino Iris was in, and Barry quickly runs over. He's about to completely body Cold before he stops him and tells Flash that bombs are going to go off soon if he doesn't defuse them. Thankfully, during a pretty cool action scene, he is able to defuse the bombs, throwing them into the air and causing snow to start falling. After Flash runs off, the perspective switches back to Hal and Ace, who are bystanders of the fight with Cold. They drive off into the desert before reaching an airbase. Here we see just how badly Hal was affected by the Korean War. He was put in a psych ward for a long time, and he's been struggling to find a stable job, basically relying on Ace. After this, Hal goes to a job interview with Carol Ferris. For those of you who don't know, Ferris Aircraft is the company that Hal worked for in the comics, and they actually make it really important to the main story here. So far, I really like the differences the writers have made here. They really did just recreate the old stuff and make a few changes, so the story really feels like its own world, however similar to the original. Hal starts being trained at Ferris Aircraft, being supervised by Rick Flag. After this, the comic gives a bunch of flashbacks to Flag's life, showing how much pain he's gone through and what a deep character he is. Rick Flag Sr. isn't really a character I know much about, but the comic does a really good job fleshing him out. Though, unfortunately, the movie's adaptation kinda sweeps him under the rug. It's weird though, because he gets enough screen time to be relevant, but not really enough to be compelling, so he's kinda just there, and it's really strange. Moving on, John returns home, finding Batman waiting for him. He asks for help concerning the Center, as more cases of it have been breaking out across the country and the world at large. As he's leaving, he says a cold line that only Batman could say.
Make no mistake, though. I have a $70,000 sliver of radioactive meteor to stop the one from Metropolis. With you, all I need is a penny for a book of matches.
After that, Wonder Woman is granted a Medal of Honor by the President, but is then quickly shoved aside and sent away on a vacation because of her political beliefs. Superman protests this, but it's to no avail. Superman is interesting in this story. He's similar to the Dark Knight Returns version, where he's kind of reluctant to be a tool of the government, and I like that because Superman is a human first and foremost, and an alien demigod second. Hal is brought into the desert by Carol, with the two of them forming a budding romance. She reveals to him that the real Ferris Aircraft is a government-funded space program, and he's going to be one of their top pilots. And it's here that we're introduced to a key character of the story, King Faraday. I hope this hasn't been too much for you guys so far. I'm really trying my best to make this digestible.
Even before you start, that was a preemptive
Faraday reveals that the US has been really going places with their space research, and they've been trying to reach Mars, which is hinted to be one of the reasons why John arrived on Earth in Gotham. After this, we cut back to Flash stopping Gorilla Grodd in Central City. As he lands the final blow, Grodd turns out to be a robot, and then the government shows up to try and capture Flash. He's able to escape, thankfully, and it leaves Faraday in a pretty awkward spot. After, John interrogates a rogue scientist raving about the Center and government conspiracies until Faraday shows up again to take away the scientist. Before he leaves though, John is able to shake his hand, gaining his knowledge of their Mars mission that Hal's a part of. Later that day, John watches the news where Flash hijacks the broadcast and tells the world that after the government's attempt on his life, he's retiring as the Flash to protect his loved ones. Following that announcement, John meets with Batman for the last time, giving him all of his evidence on the Center before heading to the rocket site to hopefully go back home to Mars. Then it cuts to the rocket's takeoff. John is attempting to board it, but is stopped again by Faraday, who saw him on the security cameras, because those were around in the 50s, apparently. I'm serious. He has to choose whether to save King or get on the rocket, and as the newfound hero he's slowly becoming, he makes the right choice, but because of the fire from the exhaust, he falls unconscious. In space, something goes wrong with the rocket. Hal says he can try to crash land it, but Flag, who's also flying on board, refuses because it's full of explosives, which were meant as a failsafe if the Martians were hostile. Ace tries to save the rocket with his team, but are unable to. Thankfully, Superman shows up at the last minute to save Hal. and Rick Flag has one final moment with his wife before the rocket explodes, killing them both. Again, this is done so much better in the comic. Flag just gets so much more development between the opening island sequence, the references to him leading the Suicide Squad, and the flashbacks with him and his wife. They really just did him dirty.
Alright, I get it!
In the next segment, Faraday interrogates John back in the facility about what he's doing on Earth. I actually really like the bond that these two slowly build. They aren't really focused on the outside world, they more so keep asking questions about one another. For example, John asks why Faraday's first name is King. After this, Hal works in one of the air hangars before being flown off by a strange green light. Hal arrives to find a dying Abin Sur, who says he came to Earth to assist mankind against the Center, but the explosion from the rocket knocked him out of space, and he found himself here in the desert. He passes the battery and the ring off to Hal, who becomes the new Green Lantern. In the comic, he practices his skills in the desert for a while, but in the movie, he doesn't actually use the ring proper until the climax. I don't know which one fits better because both kind of make sense, but I'd say him using his powers to give Abin a burial makes sense with his character. Next, we see Wonder Woman sparring on Themyscira before a large shadow engulfs her. At the same time, Superman has a talk with Batman, who is now sporting his Silver Age look and has Robin at his side, which is a nice touch. They talk about paranoia concerning the Center that's been engulfing the entire country and the role that superheroes have been playing. Meanwhile, Faraday and John play chess, with a neat cameo from Vandal Savage, which is funny considering that the voice of Faraday is the same guy that voices Vandal in Justice League.
Say, you want to come over to my house?
Then suddenly, a giant pterodactyl arrives and starts attacking. Superman shows up and takes care of it Fleischer Brothers style before Diana crashes her invisible jet on the base, heavily wounded. She warns everybody about the Center before passing out from blood loss. After that, Faraday and Superman assemble a team, consisting of Air Force bombers, Ace's crew, Green Arrow, the Blackhawks, and Adam Strange. If you don't know who half of those people are, it's okay, go watch Justice League.
No!
After the team's assembled, Superman goes to run reconnaissance of the Center until he's blasted down by what I can only describe as a god laser, and he falls into the ocean, presumably dead. I really like the restraint that the writers showed with DC's Big Three. Superman, Wonder Woman, and Batman all feel like good characters in both versions, but they aren't center stage. In general, the story does a pretty good job balancing a cast this big. Flash, John, the Big Three, Flag, Faraday, Ace, and especially Hal, who is kind of the main character. I mean, he gets the first scene in both versions, and gets the biggest chunk of screen time than all of the other characters. I've always preferred Jon Stewart as my Green Lantern because I grew up more on the Justice League cartoon, but this story did make a really good case for Hal Jordan. Also, I probably should have mentioned that the Center is now a giant Lovecraftian floating island covered in dinosaurs, and it was actually the island from the beginning of the comic where Flag was stranded. Pretty crazy, and if you feel off guard, that's how I felt when I watched the movie.
Yeah, alright, that's enough.
Anyways, the team is joined by Hal, Flash, and John, now in a more heroic form, as well as the scientist Ray Palmer, who you might know as the Atom. They devise a plan to use a nuke to damage the Center from the inside and then shrink it down using shrinking technology, which will also blow it up. The team heads out, and it's pretty sick. Batman gets some licks in, and everybody gets their own little moment. Hal and Ace fly inside the Center, which gives them a pretty nasty head trip, as their jets are about to be destroyed, setting off the bombs they have inside. Hal uses his ring to save himself and Ace as everything explodes. On the outside, John and Faraday fight through dinosaur monster things before the Center starts infiltrating John's mind. Faraday tries to help him, but dies in the process. In the comic, he's able to straight up take all of the mental influence into himself, which calls back to the conversations the two of them had previously. But in the movie, he goes out holding grenades and falling into a monster's mouth. That's the callback to the comic I was talking about in the beginning. Faraday was a solid character. I had only ever seen him in Justice League before, so this was a really pleasant surprise and felt like a great addition to the story. Back on the Center, Flash runs laps around it, faster than he's ever run in his life, and after some emotional motivation, he's able to finally trap it and it explodes. Everybody celebrates soon after, and Superman is brought back to the shore by Aquaman. In the epilogue, superheroes become legal again, incredible style. The Justice League is formed, other characters are set up for the future, and all of this while a monologue is given by President John F. Kennedy talking about the new frontier.
Nothing bad ever happens to the Kennedys! What?
Honestly, what a sincere, nice ending. So let's see how the comic messed it up. I jest, but really the movie did a lot differently. I've mentioned a few things already, but there's a lot more. Starting off, the main villain of the story, the Censor, got way more build-up and exposition in the comic. John, Ace's crew, and others all research it in some way or another while the movie Oh my god, I can't talk. While the movie loosely references it a few times before it arrives. I guess the movie version is more focused on the characters, but the characters aren't developed the best in the movie. Not bad, but not great either. There's a myriad of missing scenes, including, but not limited to, Aquaman's introduction, Wildcat's boxing match, Flash's origins, the entire meeting of the magic characters on the moon, John's research into the Center, and finally, all of John Henry's subplot. I get that that was pretty dark subject matter, so I kind of understand why they cut it, but I feel like a lot of the other stuff could have been put in. None of these scenes were particularly long, so it really only would have been a few minutes each. The movie's only an hour and 15 with credits, so there was definitely room for more material. If you can make a 2-hour and 30-minute movie about a Batman story shorter than this one, then I think an hour and 40 isn't too much for a DC ensemble. I know in my year 1 video I said that movie was pretty early in the DC movie pipeline, but this was even earlier, 2008. Maybe all of the flaws with the film could have been the producers testing the waters for what they could do. I mean, the writer from the comic helped work on the movie to an extent, so it's entirely possible. But if they were testing the waters, I don't really know why they would pick this story with so many different moving pieces as one of their first. Animation-wise, the movie was very visually pleasing. It looks somewhat similar to the Tomorrowverse animation, but a bit more unique.
Those movies are terrible.
It's smooth and lends itself well to that 1950s setting, and when it comes to casting, we got some pretty cool choices. First up, we have Keith David playing the Center, so that's destined to be good.
It is the center that holds, not you.
Neil Patrick Harris is the Flash, which is oddly a really good choice. Phil Morris is doing great as Faraday. Alan Ritchson cameos as Aquaman, which is nice, I guess. Corey Burton plays Abin Sur, again, that's a great choice. James Arnold Taylor is the voice of Captain Cold, which is random but cool. But the weirdest choice of them all, Kyle MacLachlan as Superman. Kyle is a great actor, and he fits Superman surprisingly well, though he doesn't get too many lines. And I gotta say, David Boreanaz killed it as Green Lantern. I haven't seen him in anything else, but he was great here. So, in the end, the comic beats the movie by a pretty wide margin. The movie tells the same story, but the comic just has far more development for the characters and plot. It feels like a celebration of superheroes and their morals and what they stand for, while the movie just doesn't do it as well. If you want to watch something more unique than the other DC stuff, this might be of interest to you, but otherwise I wouldn't really go out of your way and just read the comic instead. Speaking of, I'll be posting a poll after this video comes out on what comic you guys want me to compare next, so be sure to go vote on that. Anyway, with all that stuff being said, thank you so much for watching this video. I am sorry it took so long to make. Like I said, school is a pain, but be sure to like and subscribe to see more from me in the future, hopefully sooner than this time. Leave your thoughts and opinions in the comments below, and I'll see you nerds later.
Tell me why it ain't nothing but a holiday. Tell me why it ain't nothing but a this day. Tell me why I never